Hi, welcome once again to Existential Psychology here at the University of West Georgia. This video will be the 7th one in a series on Friedrich Nietzsche. Okay, so before we begin, hat of the day. Here's your hat of the day to help me keep my hair under control. Alrighty, so what did we do in the last video? Okay, so in video number 6 in this series, we were looking at the idea of the eternal recurrence and its relation to Amor Fati, or the fundamental love or affirmation for life. So in that video, hopefully you got the idea that the eternal recurrence basically represents a challenge to self-creation, because at the bottom of the whole idea is the question, how might we be able to live our lives in a way that would be affirmable under this terrible weight of the idea of the eternal recurrence? In other words, the essential question is, if you had to live your life, let's say today, an infinite number of times, how might you live it differently from how you would otherwise? Like if you were to consider the meaning and substance of everything you go through today with respect to that terrible, terrible possibility that you might have to live it out infinitely, how might you live it out differently than you otherwise would? And the same would be true not only of what you would experience today, but what you would experience throughout the entire span of your life. How would you live your life differently if you had to live it infinitely, if it were not just a stepping stone to something else? Okay, like heaven or, nirvana. I guess I brought up that example in the last video. So in essence, what this is a challenge to self-creation. And once again, ultimately, the criterion that would differentiate the deeply affirmable life from all other types of life would be aesthetic in nature. So it's a challenge to become the artist of your own life, the artist and architect of your own existence, and hopefully in doing so evolve a way of being, a life that is deeply beautiful in some sense, that embodies a kind of compelling and powerful aesthetic along the way, because it's only in those terms that actually life is affirmable in the first place, at least according to Nietzsche. And here, once again, let me remind you of what I quoted in the last video from The Birth of Tragedy. So, it is only as an aesthetic event that existence and the world are eternally justified. So that's from The Birth of Tragedy. So that's all stuff from the last video. So in this video, what we want to do, let's get the computer going so I know where we are in your notes, is talk about an idea that appears early in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which has to do with how one develops toward that kind of deep, yes-saying, affirmative posture toward life. So this, I think, is an idea that is particularly appealing to psychologists, because we psychologists, part of what we like is developmentally oriented theories, and psychology is full of them. Boy, if you take a course in developmental psychology, you're going to be hip deep, if not neck deep, in developmental theories. Like, for instance, there's Erik Erikson's psychosocial theory, there's Kohlberg's theory about how we develop with regard to moral reasoning. There's Freud's psychosexual stages. There's Piaget's stages of cognitive development, and more. There's a lot of them, is the point. So I think that this particular part of Nietzsche's thinking would be of a special interest to psychologists, because it's about a 3-stage developmental theory. Now, where you can find it in your reading is on page 137 to 139. So, a 3-stage developmental theory about development toward the yes-saying life, about developing toward Amor Fati, okay? Love of life or love of fate. All right, now each one of these stages is going to be represented by a different kind of creature, and just to sort of let you know the lay of the terrain right off, the first one's going to be a camel, and these are symbolic, right? The second one is going to be a lion, and the last one is going to be a child. Okay, so And he talks about this in terms of metamorphoses of spirit. So let's sort of go to 137 and thereabouts. Okay, so here's a description of the very first stage, the camel. Now here what you have to do maybe is think about camels and what you know about camels. And basically for Nietzsche, what the camel symbolizes is the bearing of burdens. Okay, so the camel is a beast of burden. It carries other people's stuff, in essence. All right, you know? And hopefully, as I'm saying this, you're starting to wonder about it a little bit metaphorically. What pattern of life might this represent that is mostly about carrying other people's, let's say, baggage? All right, not just burdens, but baggage. Okay, so here's a description on 138 from Nietzsche. What is difficult, asks the spirit that would bear much, and kneels down like a camel, wanting to be well loaded. You know, like sometimes life can be that. Kneeling down in order for you to be well loaded with other people's stuff. And by stuff what we mean especially is things like values, habits, ways of thinking, ways of feeling, social conventions, and so on. Like sometimes life is about bearing all of that. All right, so let's restart it since I sort of went on a little thing there. What is difficult, asks the spirit that would bear much, and kneels down like a camel, wanting to be well loaded. What is most difficult, O heroes, asks the spirit that would bear much, that I may take it upon myself and exult in my strength. Okay, so it's about bearing other people's burdens, and most especially the pattern of other people's lives. And once again, let's focus it a little bit on moral values, because that's always at the center of Nietzsche's project, inquiring into the nature of values, and more specifically moral values. Well, for the most part, and maybe you can see this in terms of human psychological development, like for the most part we you know, we do what we're told. You know, our parents sort of show us, our parents especially, but society more generally, tell us how to think and how to perceive, and what values are the right ones and what the values are the wrong ones, and what good is, since we're speaking about moral values, and what either bad or evil is. Let's remember from our treatment of master and slave morality that bad and evil are two different categories, all right? But no matter what, a lot of life, and probably a lot of early life, is like that. Like think about when you're a kid, you know, like how you walk around and for the most part, you buy what your parents tell you, you know. All right, so carrying, it's basically a paradigm of conformity, okay? You know, so bearing the heavy weight of other people's way of thinking about life and valuing and orienting to the world and what is real and what is not real and so on. Okay, so that's the camel. Now, the second stage, number 2, is the lion. Okay, so the first thing you have to do when you hear about the lion is realize that the lion is not a beast of burden. Okay, like probably it's a very poor choice. Like if you're looking for an animal to carry your crap around, a lion would be a very poor choice, because probably what would be carried around inside the lion would be you. Okay, so the lion is a predator. Okay, the lion is a hunter and a predator, not an obedient beast of burden. Okay, so let's make note of this, that one of the attributes of the camel is obedience. Okay, obedience. So the camel does what thou shalt do, all right? So spinning it a little bit in a Nietzschean way. Okay, but we're starting to talk about the lion. So the question he starts out with, this is going to be on 139, is why is being a good beast and a good obedient beast a burden not enough for life? Like, why isn't that the ultimate paradigm, that if you're like an efficient beast of burden that carries around other people's baggage for them and lives other people's lives for them, why is that not enough? So on 139 he goes, my brothers, why is there a need in the spirit for the lion? Like why would we need to develop that way? Why is not the beast of burden, which renounces and is reverent, enough? To create new values, that even the lion cannot do. Okay, so that's creating new values is going to be what the child is up to. So to create new values, even the lion cannot do. But the creation of freedom for oneself for new value, for new creation, that is within the power of the lion. The creation of freedom for oneself and a sacred no, even to duty. For that, my brothers, the lion is needed. To assume the right to new values, that is the most terrifying assumption for a reverent spirit that would bear much. Okay, so this is going to be very different from the paradigm of the lion, or the camel rather. Okay, so verily to him it is praying, like not praying with an A, praying with an E, and a matter for a beast of prey, a predator, like a lion. He once loved thou shalt. Okay, so thou shalt is sort of the watchword of the camel. He once loved thou shalt as most sacred. Now he must find illusion and caprice even in the most sacred, that freedom from his love may become his prey. Freedom from what he loved previously may be what he's hunting, okay? The lion is needed for such prey. All right, so the lion is a predator, and basically the lion is about disobedience, saying a sacred no to thou shalt, he says. All right, so, and the first thing maybe at this point you should notice is that, wow, so for Nietzsche, being a kind of obedient robot, basically, is the lowest evolution of spirit. To be obedient is the lowest metamorphosis of spirit. To be disobedient, like a lion, a predatory lion, is a higher order of being. Okay, so this is already inverting maybe some of our everyday type logic, where we tend to think that, well, you know, the highest moral values are about obedience. Well, you know, the thing is, the guards at Treblinka were pretty obedient too. All right, so that may make you wonder a little bit about whether obedience is the be-all, end-all of life, whether the fear principle and being faithful to the fear principle is the ultimate point of human existence. Well, maybe at certain points, being disobedient is a higher order of being. Okay, now, part of the problem with disobedience and rebellion is basically what he's talking about. You know, the lion is a rebellious spirit and won't just sort of kowtow and do what he's told. All right, he won't just sort of, you know, take on his back the tonnage of values and habits and typical modes of perception and, you know, sort of cultural habits, like making sure you watch the Kardashians every week. Like, he won't sort of take that on his back all the damn time. So the lion is a higher order. Now, the reason why rebellion is not the telos or end point of this partly has to do with the rebel's paradox, although he doesn't talk about this in Zarathustra, but I'm adding this so to help you understand it a little bit more deeply. Like, think about the paradigm of rebellion. You know, oftentimes, I would say late adolescents rebel against their parents. At first they conform to what their parents say, like a good obedient camel. Then they get a little bit older and their cognitive capacities develop, and they realize that, oh, their parents aren't the gods or demigods that they thought they were when they were little kids, but their parents are faulted and, you know, they make mistakes, they're fallible, and all of this. So eventually, when teenagers grow toward maybe later adolescence, like between 15 and 20, fairly often, not all the time, they will go through a period of rebelling against their parents. And one of the startling realizations that can happen toward the end of that process, if you're lucky, is to realize that there's such a thing as the rebel's paradox. And the rebel's paradox goes like this. Like, if you make rebellion against X the main paradigm for your life, like if you make rebelling against whatever your parents are. You know, if your parents are sort of straight-laced conservative, you're going to be like a hippie or something like that. Or if your parents are hippies, you're going to be a straight-laced conservative. Or if your parents are like very devout Christians, you're going to be a Satanist, or vice versa. If your parents are Satanists, you're going to be the most devout Christian possible. The paradox is that, well, if you make rebellion your primary way of defining yourself, then in a way, you're still being defined by what you're rebelling against. You getting it? So like, if your whole sort of impulse is to be the exact opposite of your parents, like a photographic negative, old school example, a photographic negative of your parents, well, you're still being defined by what your parents are. That's the paradox, and it's sort of a vicious reversal of what you think. You think at first like, well, damn, I'm living my own life, and not really. You're living an inverted form of your parents' life. That doesn't necessarily mean you're living your life. Just to live a photographic negative of your parents' values and habits and all of that kind of stuff, like what they care about. So that's the rebel's paradox, and that's part of the reason why the posture of the lion, the rebellious posture of the lion, isn't the end point of this developmental scheme, because, you know, you're still not being yourself, in essence. You're still living someone else's life, just in an inverted form. Okay, so that's the rebel paradox. Oh my goodness, you know, I thought like I was being, you know, so damn original in rebelling against my parents, and I'm trying to come into my own identity. And yeah, that can be an important step along the way, but that doesn't mean you've arrived yet at your life. Just because you're living an inverted form of your parents' values doesn't yet mean that you're discovering and creating your own. Okay, so that's why the lion is not like the ultimate answer to the riddle, what is life about? Okay, so for Nietzsche, okay, let's summarize for a second. Okay, first there's this obedient beast of burden paradigm for our lives. Then there's this rebellious predatory paradigm for our lives, where you're just sort of saying no to what you're told, no even to your duty, no to all the different ways that you've told you have to be, how you have to think, how you have to feel, how you have to live your damn life. You're saying no. That you know, the word no is such an interesting damn word, partly because we learn it so early in life. Most people do, you know, around the age maybe of 2, or probably even before that for a lot of people. So, and kids love to say no when they first learn the word. They love to sort of negate everything in sight. Well, it turns out that that word no ends up being one of life's most advanced vocabulary words. And the reason why is because, you know, later on in life it can be a real challenge to figure out when you should rebel against something and when you should go ahead and carry a burden. All right? You know, so it becomes a challenge in adult life, I would say, for most of us, to figure out like when you should lay claim to your own boundaries and have your own desires be the main thing, and when you should defer, perhaps at points, to others. Okay, so that it seems like such a straightforward word, only 2 points in Scrabble even, you know, but it turns out to be one of the trickiest and most advanced vocabulary words of them all. You know, okay, so, all right, now we're at the brink of the child. Okay, so the third creature is the child, and probably because I've dropped some spoilers along the way, you can sort of figure out what the child represents. So first of all, the child is about creating your own values. It's not about conformity. It's not about non-conformity. It's about being what you are. Okay? And what you are probably in various ways aligns with what other people tell you, and in various ways deviates from what other people tell you. Okay, so when you become your own person, you're probably not going to look from the outside like an obedient camel, and you're not going to look like a disobedient lion either. So in terms of you know, moral values, the camel would be morality, the moral. The lion would be the immoral, in a certain way. So notice that the immoral is a higher formation of spirit than the moral. And the child would be the amoral. Okay, so amoral, okay, so in case you here's the thing, like in normal English, we sometimes conflate these two words, like immorality and amorality. They're not actually the same thing, okay? So let's tease them apart a little bit. So to be immoral means that you're actively negating the dominant morality. To be amoral means you're off the grid of that would sort of define the moral relative to the immoral. It's not like you're playing the game of morality. It's not like you're playing the game of immorality. You're playing some other game. And the other game is being yourself, living your life. Quite apart from what you're told, quite apart from rebelling against what you're told. Okay, so now the child is represents a bunch of things too. So innocence, to be beyond good and evil. Okay, a title of one of Nietzsche's famous books written around the same time as Thus Spoke Zarathustra. So the child is beyond good and evil. The child is not good, the child is not evil, the child is beyond good and evil. You getting it? The child is amoral, not immoral, amoral. Okay, so the child uses the freedom that the lion generates by laying claim to a larger province or range of life than simply conforming. Okay, so the child uses that freedom to create his or her own ways of life and new values. Okay, so the creation of new values. Oh, wait a minute, where have we heard this before? Well, that was one of the attributes of master morality. In fact, it's the most interesting and powerful aspect of master morality because that's really the deep prerogative of masters, even more so than being able to order people around, is the opportunity to create and propagate new values. So the child is creative. Okay, the child is one of these artists of life, the way I was describing it to you in the intro to this video. All right, the child has become an artist at the level of life, which is to say an artist at the level of values and orientation to world and what things mean and all of that. So the child is playful also. So that whole business, remember when we were talking about, like I said something like, well, you know, another way this hermeneutic of suspicion plays out is in terms of questioning the monolithic status of seriousness. Okay, and hence making room for levity and risibility. Let's improve your vocabulary, okay? So risibility. Oh, you are going to crush the freaking GREs at the end of these videos. Risibility means sort of like laughability than when something's funny. So if something's risible, R-I-S-I-B-L-E, okay, risible, that means it's sort of funny. You can laugh at it. It comes from Latin, rideo, okay, second conjugation if you studied Latin. So which means to laugh, okay? So rideo in Latin, laughable, okay? So the child is a bearer of laughter and dance and playfulness and playful creativity. The child is, in essence, a Dionysian character, I would say. The child is amoral. The child is beyond good and evil. The child is being him or herself and, you know, consequently, playfully creating new values and new forms of life, and as a consequence of that, a kind of bridge perhaps to the Übermensch. The child would be a conduit or a bridge to the Übermensch. Okay, so very interesting inversion. Okay, let's get the idea of the inversion again. Okay, so the lowest metamorphosis of spirit is about obedience. You just obey like a damn puppet, like a damn robot. Like it takes a little bit more oomph, spiritual oomph, to rebel against all of that. It takes more spiritual oomph yet to live your own life, right? Quite apart from whether it coincides with what other people are telling you to do or not. You know, so the child is beyond obedience. The child is beyond disobedience. All right, it's a whole new way. Like once you, and you know, because most of you are young people, like listening to this, remember when I said you can be young and poor and still be a bearer of master morality? The same is true here, okay? You know, so the child who is in a way a bearer of master morality, you can be young, 20 years old, eating lots of ramen noodles and so on. And by the way, I'm not putting that down. I eat ramen noodles practically every day. I got so addicted to those college foods when I was going through all my degrees, you know, that I still, I'll probably like a ramen. I should buy stock in the ramen noodle company probably. So, yeah, you know, you can be 20 years old, not have a lot of money, be eating a lot of ramen noodles, and yet be a Nietzschean child. Let's remember that one of the descriptors of this character Zarathustra is, early on, Zarathustra has become a child. Okay, so you may think of Zarathustra as sort of, you know, sort of one of these wizened old, you know, prophetic-looking characters, but you know, Nietzsche's description is, well, Zarathustra has become a child. You know, but a playful creator, okay, you getting it? A playful creator of new values and new patterns of life, who ultimately is not conforming, not disobeying, but living his own life, all right? So you can start to live your own life if you're 20 years old, right? You can start to think for yourself when you're 20 years old. Not merely thinking the way other people do, not merely rebelling against how other people are, but really thinking for yourself, really starting to live your own life. This is possible for you guys, 20 years old. Hey, don't take my word for it. Don't take Nietzsche's word for it. I would say be empirical. Go out there, try it out, and see what happens. And if life feels worse, well, you can always regress back, you know, but who knows? Maybe in certain ways your life will be enhanced and deepened, and hell, why not? Why not give it a try? You know, if you're 20 years old and you're in college, you know that, man, what a great time to experiment with different things. Wonderful time to experiment with different things. Find out what works for you. Find out what doesn't work for you. And ultimately, see if you can become the person that you are. Okay, have a good day.